When you hear the name Dracula, right away you're probably picturing Bram Stoker's famous vampire, right? The cape, the fangs, all that supernatural dread. But actually, the true story behind the name is grounded in a historical reality that is, well, it's honestly way more shocking and complex than any Gothic novel. Today, we're stripping away all that Hollywood folklore to look at the very real 15th century warlord who inspired the myth, Vlad the Impaler. Okay, let's dive into this explainer and uncover the actual man behind the monster.
To really understand Vlad, we've got to start with his name. Dracul actually translates directly to dragon. You see, back in 1431, which happens to be the exact year Vlad III was born, his father was inducted into this prestigious Christian chivalric group called the Order of the Dragon. Their whole mission was to protect European lands from invasion. Because of this, his dad became known as Vlad Dracul. So Dracula, it literally just means son of the dragon. Right off the bat, this anchors our story firmly in actual history. We're stepping completely out of the realm of vampire bats and dropping right into the gritty, real-world politics of Eastern Europe.
And to say those politics were volatile, that is a massive understatement. Vlad was born into the Principality of Wallachia, which at the time acted as a highly unstable geopolitical powder keg. Think of it as a violently contested buffer state, basically a borderland that was constantly being used as a doormat by its much larger, constantly warring neighbors.
To put this into perspective, let's just track his early life for a second. It's totally defined by rapid, chaotic shifts in power. He's born in 1431, but by 1442, he's handed over as a political hostage. Fast forward to 1453, and the supposedly impenetrable city of Constantinople falls to the Ottomans. I really want you to keep this rapid progression in mind as we go through this explainer, because it sets up absolutely vital context. For young Vlad, extreme violence, shifting loyalties, and severe instability, those weren't the exceptions. That was just everyday life.
It really perfectly illustrates exactly what Wallachia was up against on the global stage. On one side, you have the Kingdom of Hungary, which was this massive Catholic Christian power. And on the other side, you've got the rapidly expanding Islamic power of the Ottoman Empire. Wallachia was essentially sitting on a geographical fault line. Its people and rulers were constantly being crushed between these two massive, colliding tectonic plates of military might. They were basically forced to play both sides just to survive.
It was exactly this kind of intense political squeezing that led to the defining trauma of Vlad's childhood. To prove his loyalty to the Ottoman Sultan, Vlad's father was actually forced to hand over young Vlad, along with his younger brother Radu, as royal hostages. They were taken deep into the Ottoman Empire. Now, this wasn't just some standard political arrangement. It was a deeply personal captivity that would completely forge Vlad's worldview and, honestly, create a profoundly tragic family dynamic. What's absolutely fascinating here is how these two royal hostages handled their situation. They ended up taking completely divergent paths. Vlad fiercely resisted his captors. He nursed a burning hatred for the Ottomans, threw himself entirely into military training, and studied their tactics with one singular goal: destroying them. His brother Radu, on the other hand, he went a complete opposite way. Radu assimilated. He converted to Islam and eventually even joined the Janissaries, which was the elite Ottoman military guard. As you can imagine, this created a really bitter, lifelong rivalry between the two siblings.
But the true turning point for Vlad actually came from back home. In 1447, Hungarian-backed Wallachian nobles, who were known as boyars, betrayed his family. The historical records are pretty chilling. They indicate that Vlad's older brother Mircea was blinded and buried alive, and his father, Vlad II, was executed, either beheaded or burned at the stake. Suddenly, Vlad wasn't just a hostage anymore. He was now a claimant to the Wallachian throne with a massive, burning desire for vengeance. So, armed with an initial army actually provided by the Ottomans, who totally mistakenly thought they could control him as a puppet, Vlad eventually clawed his way to power. But think about it for a second. How exactly does one maintain control in a treacherous, lawless borderland where your own nobles just murdered your family? Well, for Vlad, the answer was unimaginable, theatrical, psychological terror.
This is where he earned his infamous moniker. He used impalement as his signature method of execution. It was a slow, excruciating, and highly visible death. He impaled the boyars who betrayed his father. He purportedly burned the poor alive, claiming it would end poverty. He severely mutilated unfaithful partners and ruthlessly executed Saxon merchants in Brazov who didn't respect his trade laws. Now, the absolutely crucial point to take away from this is that while these actions seem like pure, unadulterated madness to us today, they actually functioned as absolute psychological deterrents back then. He was literally creating a regime of ultimate obedience through absolute terror.
And the crazy thing is, it worked. To give you a real idea of the paralyzing fear he commanded over his own population, consider the famous anecdote of the Golden Cup. Vlad purportedly left a solid gold goblet right in the center of his capital city, Targovishte, a city of 60,000 people. Anyone could drink from it, but it was absolutely not allowed to leave the square. And get this, during his entire reign, not a single person dared to steal it. That is the sheer level of terror he instilled.
But Vlad didn't just terrorize his own people. He boldly challenged massive foreign powers, too. In 1460, when Ottoman envoys came to collect tribute, they refused to remove their turbans in his court, citing their religious and cultural customs. Vlad's response? He actually had their turbans nailed directly to their skulls. This wasn't just a cruel act, it was a highly calculated, symbolic rejection of Ottoman overlordship. And it guaranteed one thing for sure, an all-out war with the Sultan.
And that brings us to the ultimate military clash between Vlad and Sultan Mehmed II, the very same man who had just conquered Constantinople. As you'd expect, the Sultan was absolutely furious, and he marched on Wallachia with the full, terrifying might of his empire.
Now, we're talking about an impossible, real-life David versus Goliath scenario here. Mehmed brought an army estimated at up to 150,000 men. Vlad, on the other hand, could barely muster 30,000 poorly equipped troops. To put that into perspective, he was outnumbered 5-1 by an imperial superpower. This staggering numerical disadvantage meant Vlad simply couldn't fight a traditional war. It instantly justifies why he had to rely on desperate, utterly unconventional guerrilla warfare to defend his homeland.
Vlad ended up using everything he learned during his time as an Ottoman hostage right back against them. He knew exactly how to break their morale. He methodically rolled out a scorched earth strategy. We're talking evacuating civilians, burning crops, and poisoning wells, so the advancing army had literally nothing to eat or drink. And even more horrifying, he utilized primitive biological warfare. He deliberately sent people infected with the plague, leprosy, and cholera directly into the enemy camps to spread disease.
All of these tactics culminated in one of the most daring military operations of the 15th century, the night attack at Targovishte on June 17, 1462. Using his fluency in Turkish, Vlad actually disguised himself in Ottoman clothing, infiltrated the Sultan's massive camp in the dead of night, and successfully navigated between the tents. His goal was nothing short of assassinating Sultan Mehmed in his sleep. Now, while he did miss the Sultan's actual tent, the ensuing chaos and surprise attack resulted in an estimated 15,000 Ottoman casualties.
But the real devastating psychological blow came the next morning. As the Sultan's surviving forces pressed forward toward the capital, they didn't find a defending army waiting for them. Instead, they walked into a macabre forest. Vlad had impaled 20,000 Turkish soldiers and allies, leaving their bodies on stakes in a massive ring outside the city. The sheer, unimaginable horror of this sight completely broke the Ottoman resolve. Sultan Mehmed, who was arguably the most powerful man in the world at that time, was so shaken that he ordered his army to retreat in horror. Despite this unbelievable tactical victory, Vlad's success was actually pretty short-lived. In late 1462, while he was seeking aid from the Hungarians, he was suddenly betrayed by his supposed ally, King Matthias Corvinus, and placed under strict house arrest for over a decade. Now, he did manage to briefly reclaim the Wallachian throne years later in 1476, but by early 1477, Vlad died in battle against a renewed Ottoman invasion. His highly turbulent life ended violently, exactly the same way it had been lived.
And it's right here, in death, that the myth of Dracula truly began to take flight. According to historical accounts, his head was severed, preserved in honey, and sent to Istanbul as proof of his demise. Yet rumors instantly started swirling. Some unsubstantiated whispers claimed he managed to escape to Italy. Even more famously, when archaeologists excavated his supposed grave at the Snagov Monastery in the 1930s, the body was just missing. These lingering historical mysteries and vanishing remains only threw gasoline on the fire, completely fueling the supernatural myths that endure to this very day.
So, what does this all mean for us today? How do we even begin to evaluate a legacy wrapped in so much blood, propaganda, and fiction? Well, we really have to pull back and evaluate his historical reality completely objectively against that enduring mythology. Because there is a very stark contrast in how he's remembered. On one hand, in the 19th century, Romanian nationalists reimagined him not as a sadist, but as a fierce, uncompromising patriot who protected the borders of Europe against a massive invading force. But on the other hand, historians today remind us that while his methods were undoubtedly horrific, he didn't exactly invent the violence of his era. He was simply a brutal product of a violently unstable 15th century culture, using the extreme tools of terror that he learned while in captivity to try and keep his vulnerable nation alive.
Which brings us to the final lingering thought of this explainer. Look back at the facts we've covered today. The intense childhood trauma, the impossible geopolitical odds, the scorched earth survival tactics, and, of course, the undeniable reign of psychological terror. I'll leave it to you to decide based on this history. Was Vlad the Impaler a grim, necessary hero protecting his homeland from total annihilation, or was he simply a bloodthirsty madman? It's a fascinating question, and one that absolutely proves the real history is always vastly more compelling than the fiction. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the history behind the myths.